was I went so far as to propose. We got engaged. We set a date. We got the hall. We had flowers. We had invitations. Wow. We had everything going. And then 3 weeks before, I called it off. Here's like a dirty little secret I feel with failure that you don't understand or know when you go, and most of us do, the traditional track in your life. So you start out in kindergarten, grade school, high school, college, so on. And throughout that time, what you're taught is failure bad. So you get the F, or you are even worse. This to me is worse.
Right.
I hate this for my kids, although they don't go to a school that has grades, which is part and parcel of my complete and total disdain for the process of how a student or a kid is not just given an F, but they're labeled an F. You are an F student. You are a D student. You are a B student. So we're already conditioned through high school, all of that, like don't fail. Fail equals bad. Then you go into corporate America, many of us do. It's kind of the same thing, like, hey, we've got these parameters here. You may see a way better than or outside of these parameters that can work, but if it doesn't, you can't fail. You're not allowed to fail. So when I say macro, micro, I got to go like one level above macro, and that is this. When you leave that structure, when you get outside of the traditional school model, outside of the corporate life, which is something that took me 42 years to do, there's this epiphany. And it's the best analogy I can use is this. Let's say we're going to make a cake, right? When we take that cake and we put the ingredients together in the cake, we got sugar, we got eggs, we've got, I don't know, water, milk, whatever else is in there. But we don't put the flour in. Will the cake bake? If you don't have flour, will the cake bake?
I don't know. Actually,
it won't.
I'm sure it will.
The flour,
I mean, something will happen.
Cake, not a flourless cake. For those of you out there, like, well, you get my point. Like, if you're making a regular cake, you can't have the cake without the flour. Right. In life, truly, what you learn after you leave this like failure bad institution is you can't have success without the failure. It's a key part of the recipe. It's not something that is outside of success. It's something that creates success. You have to fail. And entrepreneurs and people that get outside of this like traditional path, what they do is go after failure and get to it as quickly as possible because they know it's necessary and they know they're going to have to. In the traditional world of school, corporate America, we run from failure. We don't go as far as we need to because failure might be on the other side, and that's a bad thing. Entrepreneurs run right to it, right through it. The best analogy I can use of this is cows and buffalo, and then I'm going to answer your question more specifically. Have you ever heard the analogy of the cows and the buffaloes?
No.
When a thunderstorm comes in, herds of cows and herds of buffaloes do two different things. Herds of cows run. They run away from the storm. And what happens when you do that, right? You run and you run. You get as far away as you can. The storm's still coming. The storm doesn't stop. It's inevitably coming. In fact, it's probably building strength as it comes, right? But you're running and you're getting exhausted and you're putting all this pressure on yourself not to get stuck in that storm. And eventually you end up getting stuck in probably worse of a storm than you would at the beginning. Buffaloes, and this is real, you can Google this, they run right through the storm because they know that, oh my God, this is going to be scary and painful, but it's better to get it done now and get through it because I know it's on the other side. That's an employee. Not to make this all about those two things. The reason I set it up that way is the macro failure for me was 21 years as a corporate employee. That's my macro failure. And it actually leads to my micro failure. The reason it's a macro failure is somewhere along the way, and many of us do this, in my, like say, early teens or like late 9, 10, 11, 12, that age, was convinced, maybe by others, maybe myself, that I had to get real with my life and the dreams and ambitions and the big thoughts that I thought I could do were no longer relevant. That's kid stuff, not adult stuff. So I'm going toward adult faster. I got to get real. I wanted to be an NFL broadcaster and I ended up a claims adjuster, right? Like two very different things. So I went into the claims adjuster world. Why? Because I was checking boxes. Okay, my parents got married young. I should get married young. You get a job. You buy the house. You get the car. You ride it out for the next 40 years. And hopefully there's enough life and money left at the end for you to enjoy the things you really like to do, that retirement dream. And that failure for me was allowing myself to go into that vortex. That's the macro. How that led to the micro failure that comes up, as you asked, was because I was checking boxes right around 22, 23. Out of a bit of desperation, I met the girl on Match.com, which at the time was not a normal way to meet the girl. So I meet the girl. I start dating the girl. In retrospect, the girl's not right for me, but this must be the girl. I checked the box. I have the job. I bought the house. Now I need the girl. So I look past things that maybe my values don't align with back then because I'm supposed to have the girl. The bigger value is be like everybody else, right? Conform. In fact, I remember going out with buddies when I was so frustrated in this relationship and then hear them talk about their frustration in their relationship. And it would like reset me like, oh, okay, that's just how it is until it was not. The failure in that was I went so far as to propose. We got engaged. We set a date. We got the hall. We had flowers. We had invitations. Wow. We had everything going. And then 3 weeks before, I called it off. Remember, everybody's aware of this wedding. So now I have to go to everybody and be like, hey, your travel plans, the gift you might have bought, all of that, like, forget it. And thankfully, no one made an issue of it. Like, ooh, that's harder on you than it is me. Like, good luck to you. But it was amazing how many people said like, wow, man, that is the most powerful thing I've heard. I'm inspired by that. Good for you. When I was expecting the exact opposite reaction. For me, that was the failure. It was conforming. And then honestly, I'll just give this little anecdote to that. The girl I was with was, I'll say like a high stress type personality, highly anxious, socially anxious, especially. I'm not that guy. To the point where like if a snowflake fell, like she would project forward to a massive storm while she's driving and it would throw her into a migraine. Have to go to the hospital to get like shots of Toradol, shots of Imitrex, high stress personality. And so as time goes by, I end the relationship. I moved to Boston and we shared a dog. That's one thing we had in common. She came back up to New York, where I was living at the time, from somewhere else she had moved. When I moved to Boston, she moved away as well. And she had a boyfriend now. But she messaged me and said, hey, the boyfriend's family where we're staying, they're allergic to dogs. Can you take the dog? 6 hours away from where they were. I'm like, sure. Meet halfway. At the beginning, actually, my parents went the first time they picked up the dog. And now I'm going to meet to bring the dog back. When I'm coming back from Boston and where she's coming from in New York are two different things. I'm coming back in really good weather. She's coming in a snowstorm, massive snowstorm. So I'm thinking this is going to be, she's going to be stressed and freaked out and all of that. I'm not with her, but God, I don't even want to deal with this. But then I'm like, no, wait, her boyfriend's with her. He's driving. So I arrive earlier than them, obviously, because of the storm, to bring the dog back to her and then see them off. Who hops out of the driver's seat of the car in a snowstorm, fresh as a daisy, is her. And so the failure, what it taught me in that moment was like, I was holding on because I felt so self-important that if I do this, I'm going to break her, or I am, I'm going to be the one that hurts her. And, I don't want to do that to her because I'm so important. What I realized was as much as she was like holding me back in my mind, I was holding her back equally, which was evidenced by that moment. I didn't talk to her from that point forward. I just let it go. Like, okay, she's okay. I don't need to protect her. She's not this fragile thing. She's a salient human being or salient, whatever the word is. And she can do her thing on her own. So those failures were the macro micro is all about conforming.
Yeah.
And I try not to do that anymore.
I love how you put that. I mean, well, first of all, you're a great storyteller, and I'm now wondering what happened to the dog, but we'll talk about that later.
I think the dog just died, to be honest with you. I have no idea. I just got old. Well, I didn't see the dog.
That happens.
Yeah.
Has my dog sitting here next to me.
Yeah, this was almost 20 years ago at this point. This is like 17 years ago. I've been married 14 years at this point. So the dog, God knows.
Okay.
Yeah, plus it's setting records.
I love the idea of macro and micro, right? Let's talk about the micro, right? You talked about something that I think is really interesting, and I've thought about this a lot. That this idea of when I was a kid, I wanted to do this thing. I wanted to be an NFL broadcaster, right? It's this dream, and at some point that started to fizzle. Quick aside story. I think this is relevant, so I'm going to tell it. I was at a corporate thing a couple of years ago. We're at the offsite, and one of the teams, the way they introduced themselves was, "This is what I wanted to do when I was a little kid." And it was about 10 people got up, and each one of them said, "When I was little, I wanted to do this." And you could see their face lit up, and they're like, "And now I do this," And every single one of them. And I sat there, and what was supposed to be a funny, kind of enjoyable way to get to know each other, I walked away from thinking, how sad. I no longer am chasing the thing that lit me up as a child, right? I'm not even in the same, maybe a couple of them were in the same kind of general area. But when you were in this sort of corporate trajectory, what were the thoughts that kept you up at night when you started to realize, like, this is not the direction I want to go? What were the sort of the moments of like the turning point, so to speak, of where you wanted to go a different direction?
So we're in COVID. I'd been thinking about this for a while, obviously. You don't just one day give up a $400,000 career, right? You think about that quite a bit, especially when your wife doesn't work, 2 kids, all that. But I remember being in COVID, working from home, and I had an office in my house in Michigan. 5 at the time. I forget what it was, but he came in, or I was talking to him or whatever, and I was out of my office taking a little break, and I said to him, I don't know, my little, like in this personal development world, you let's try to, the wisdom and little one-liners. We call ourselves the fortune cookie family. We like to proximity is power, all these things we say to our kids. But I said to him, buddy, just know that you can do anything. You don't have to settle. And then I got up and I went in my office and I settled. It wasn't like I wasn't 90% down this road already. I don't want to make the story like I went from I need to change tomorrow. Like I was already down the path, but that moment sticks out as one of two turning points of like, wow, I not only am telling him something, I'm telling him something and they're not doing it, but I have an opportunity to model this if I actually make this leap. It's not about job, no job, but just aligning with, what I believe is the best and fullest version of me. So that was one. The second came, and I think everyone needs to do this. The second came in an extended period of silence. I actually I'll tell you this quick story of when this happened, but off of this, I devised this sort of solo weekend that I try to do 2 to 3 times a year, just a solo weekend by myself to go through deep introspection. But in COVID again, we're going to Florida. My wife and kids flew. I drove. We were going for a month. I brought like the dogs, a minivan full of toys, whatever. Right? I'm driving 2-3 days from Michigan to Florida while my family flew down comfortably. And on that drive, like I always say, like after a day, there's only so many podcasts and phone calls you can make before it's just like you, the road, right? Like just kind of zone out and there's not much more to do. You can't play on your phone. You can't look at anything else. It's just you and the road. And in that time, and my mind started really going like, wow, all right. I'm really thinking about this. Like, what would it take? How much am I making right now on the side? It's not enough to cover my expenses, but I've got this burn rate I can with my savings and my expenses. I could limit, like I'm just back of the napkin brain math on how much do I really need to spend? How much am I taking in if I didn't have my job? And how much of a runway do I have to try to make something happen or to try to take what I was doing and expand it? And that was really starting to like get me. And as I got toward the end of the trip, about an hour, maybe 2 before my destination in Hollywood, Florida, I got this call from a guy I used to work with in New England 4 years previously. And we don't talk. He's not a bad guy, but it's just like we were coworkers. That's about it. It was like a Saturday too. It was just a weird day to get this call. And I'm like, hey, what's up? His name is Bob. He's like, hey, I just wanted to give you a heads up, man. I know you worked with him and you guys had a bit of a relationship when you were here, but Paul, a guy about 5 years older than me with 2 sons that I worked with. And I actually is a guy that really helped me work through some stuff when I got promoted to go to Michigan. Yeah, man, he went into the hospital last night with chest pains and he never came out. And I was like 47, 48, whatever he was, young guy. And I'm like 41, 42. He's not that much older than me. 2 boys, the whole thing. And one of these stories, right? Like healthy, active dude, not a smoker. Yeah, I'll have a beer, but he's not like, he didn't abuse himself in any way, but just God knows why it was his time. And man, in that moment, I swear, I looked in the rearview mirror, I could see him, I could feel him, and just something clicked in me. And that's what I call my 99 to 100 moment. So I was 99% of the way, and it's really easy to do that, right? It's like lifting weights. Like you got to do 12, you get the first 10. The 11th one's a little hard, but that 12th one is the hard one, man. That's where the big growth is. And I believe that's 99 to 100. That's the hardest leap. Not 0 to 99, but 99 to 100. That was my 100 moment. And a month later, I quit my job. So those 2 moments is what I would say are like what was keeping me up at night, what I was thinking about. It was like, man, this is a little blip of life that we have, we're gone. And I've got a choice with what's remaining of it to either continue to go down a path that's quote unquote secure and respected and all of that, or go into what I believe is the best use of me, however you want to look at that spiritually or otherwise. And I made that choice.
What's fascinating to me as you're telling this story, and I think it's somewhat obvious, is that, and you even mentioned this, is the external was not failure, right?
Yeah.
You had a great job, a great family, right? It was the internal part of you that felt like you were failing at the things that you should be doing in life. And there's, man, I got cold chills because I think there's so many of us that can identify with that. And that 99 to 100, like a lot of people are at that point of like, I talked to many of them. I talked to a lot of them in corporate America. They're just like, I'm just doing this because I don't know what else to do.
There you go.
Right. I had a team in corporate America. I'm not going to say which company or who it was, and I decided to do some silence. We had a team meeting and I said, we're going to start off with just some silence. You can meditate if you want. I just want everybody to take a breath. We're just going to, and I remember one of the girls on the team, it wasn't 30 seconds and she was up and out of there. She's like, I can never do that again. I'm never going to do that. I cannot be silent with myself. And I was just like this eye-opening experience for me to think about how, wow, we're so out of practice with being alone or being in that moments of silence. I think that this idea that you're doing the things that everybody else says you should be doing, what society says you should be doing, and that was your 99 to 100, and you're like, I'm gonna turn this ship, right? Which it was a big step. You're like, yeah. I'm gonna quit my job. How did you take the next step? Who was your support? What was the smallest step you took to kind of turn that ship and to make that choice?
Let me do this. I want to remember that question. I'll try to remember it. I want to give, you said something in there that I really want to like zoom in on with that lady who walked away and couldn't be silent with herself. In my mind, what I pick, and I'm not there, obviously, what I picture is that's a woman on the brink. Like she is at this point of like, I can't be silent because there's something drawing me that's really scary and is going to force me to do something that is going to be scary for me, even though it might be the best thing for me. That's why she couldn't be silent with herself. But you said it a second ago, like what you do. I do this because that I want to do something else. I think failure in the context of the macro that we talked about, it all comes from like when we, at some point, probably in our teenage years or just before it, where our do and our be kind of separate, right? So who we are is not what we do. So human being versus human doing, right? Just to kind of make this point, because it's going to get a little bit like furry here as I try to describe this. But who we are is not what we do. Like, you know, I am a executive is like, yeah, I mean, that's kind of a sad statement, really. It's like, no, I'm a man, I'm a father, I'm a husband, whatever it might be. That's what I am. That's what I embrace. That's my values. And then what I do is I'm an executive. But we don't disassociate those, unfortunately, or at least we don't verbally. But at a certain point, we separate from our be to attract our do. So for me, I mentioned I want to be an NFL broadcaster. That's the do. That's what I thought the do was that aligned with the be. On the other end of that, 30 years later, as a 46-year-old man, what I know is, well, NFL broadcaster was the do or the vehicle that I thought was the most logical, reasonable, respectable, and, you know, I was a fan of football, so cool thing that I could do that aligned with my be, which is I'm a storyteller. I love influencing others and seeing something and sharing it with you. I love telling a story about an airplane landing or a lady sitting next to me, like taking the moment that I'm in and sharing it in a way that's impactful. That might mean you laugh. That might mean you cry. That might mean you take action, whatever that impact is. So the macro of failure and that lady that couldn't be alone with herself for a moment, I believe truly is because at a certain age, we separate we take our do and we go after that, and our be never changes. This is who we are.
Yeah,
but over time, and it's usually around 40, that do and be gets so wide that you just are like, ugh. And the only bridge between those two things is getting back to know who I am, my be, which I think the silence is a big piece of it. So to answer your question more specifically on the steps and everything. So the biggest thing that I can think of that was a differentiator for me back then, this is like 5-6 years ago, when I really went through what I would call like my midlife crisis, or my moment of like, oh my God, I need to reattach to who I am, as opposed to, you know, attaching myself to what I'm doing. It started with the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, but it ended with membership in an entrepreneurial community. And it was like, it's GoBundance, which you and I are both a part of, but it's not even about that. It was like, it was a non-conscious, subconscious, maybe I tripped over myself into the idea that I know clearly now, which is whoever you are and whoever you're becoming, you could put it as whatever you're doing, get in the room with those that are doing that already before you're there. In other words, stake your claim to your identity now, not when you have the thing that you think makes your identity. So if you're saying I'm a creative, that's kind of me. I'm a creative, and therefore being a creator or doing creative things like YouTube and this, that, and the other is the do that I want on my be. Well, then I'm going to stake a claim to that creator lifestyle, that creator identity now, not later. And I always talk about this with kids, right? Like when your wife got pregnant, or my wife got pregnant, like I'm not going to have a kid for 9 months. I'm not gonna be a parent for 9 months. But the moment she was pregnant, our identity shifted in that moment, our thought processes, right? And then the results were flagged. 9 months later, I have the thing because my identity is going toward it. It wasn't a surprise. It wasn't crazy. It would be like, I want to get into real estate investing because at my core, I'm analytical and I'm this and I'm that. And it's like, I'm not going to say I am until I have. And it's like, no, once you say you are, then you have, right? Like once you stake the claim to the identity, the do follows that, if that makes sense. But we all do it the other way. When I was younger, it was, I want to do that and I'm going to become that. It's like, no. Right now, I'm an NFL broadcaster. Had I said that, maybe I have a very different life, which I don't regret anything in life because, you know, I think our paths are our paths. I think the getting around a group of people that represent who I'm becoming, as opposed to who I am right now or what I'm doing right now, was the most essential factor. Not only in getting like clarity and feeling like I'm this identity is real, this future identity that I'm forging is real today, but also the moment at which I made the decision to fully go into that identity I had built the types of relationships that were more the equity I needed than savings, than real estate, than income, than whatever, right? What I fortified with people, with relational equity, was much greater with the right people than any dollar metric or asset that I could have purchased to secure myself financially.
Yeah, that all makes sense. There's a couple things that I want to sort of, to use an overused phrase, double click on. One is this idea of identity shift, right? I have experienced something very similar, moving from, what I've done for the last 20 years or so to what I'm doing now. What I was doing was my identity, right? I was in the corporate world. I was playing this role, and all of that has great lessons to be learned. But there was an identity shift that happened, and then a different path. And I love the other piece that I want to sort of highlight here is putting yourselves with others who are on similar journeys, right? And just making the investment of like, we're all on this path to go in this certain direction that is aligned with the person we are versus the thing that we do. Right. When you made that shift, that identity shift, and started taking, made the huge leap to quit your job, good paying job. What did your wife say? What did your family say? Clearly you had a support structure in the community that you had invested in, but what about those around you? Right. I think this aligns with the idea of failure, right? Because sometimes when we go through these moments of, hey, I'm failing at something, and there's a recognition of that, and we start to go a different direction, support is probably a key aspect of continuing in a different direction. What was that support like for you outside of the community of like-minded individuals?
For anybody that loves you, and this is my wife in this case, and your wife, I'm sure, and anybody listening that has loved ones that they worry about their enrollment, if you will, in the vision or the moves that you want to make. It's anybody that loves you can easily reject what you're doing. They won't reject who you are. So I go back to this. I remember years ago, I got into memorabilia, sports memorabilia, and me and a buddy of mine, we went on, we found a wholesaler, we bought some sports memorabilia, we tried to flip it on eBay. And it was fun for the moment, but nobody believed in me. My girlfriend at the time was like, "What are you doing?" It was just because I was just doing it. It was like, oh, this is something I can do. But it wasn't that I was the type of person who does that sort of thing, right? I was just doing the thing. In this iteration of me leaving the job and aligning with a different set of, I guess, who I am, my B, if you will. Like if I just said to my wife, I'm going to buy real estate and I'm going to create this community like Emerge and I'm going to quit my job, that's all dues. And if all I had were the dues for her, I don't think I would have had her support. When there's a sense of conviction in you, like that inner being in you is just saying, it's like there's a sense of such self-assurance within yourself. Like, I don't care what anybody thinks or says, because I can't stop this eruption of a feeling of like, this is the right thing for me to do because of who I am. Nobody denies that. But when I presented to her the idea of quitting, it was, or even buying the first piece of real estate, or starting at the time a multifamily networking community and really taking time away from family in the evening outside of my day job. If I was just doing those things, I don't think I have her support. But when I maybe inadvertently could show that, no, this is who I am and this is lighting me up. Like, it's not about money. There's no transaction on this. I don't care if I make anything, but like, you can feel in me this fulfillment. Later on, it created money, which is the security device, of course, for our family. And even though only it created a little bit, she can't deny, as somebody who loves me, who I am. She could deny what I do. But when my do and be are aligned, there's no denying any of it. So she had no issues. In fact, she was almost too supportive to a point where I was like 2 days before quitting. And I'm like, you need to be worried here. Like, I need to hear the worry. Like, you haven't said a word. You're just like, cool. Yeah. You're quitting on April 9th or whatever. Like, but I need you to worry. And she just said, look, what's the worst that happens here? Like, we get a 2-bedroom apartment. I'm employable to $50K. You're employable to more than that, right? Like, I've had jobs, she said, that paid me $50,000 before. You've had jobs that paid you hundreds of thousands. Like, we have to downgrade our lifestyle, but we're happy. What's the worst that could happen? And I don't believe she has that in her, of course, but that sense of love for me is because she could see this is who I am, not just what I'm doing. So I think that when somebody is fully, truly immersed and has shifted their identity, it's really hard to deny that person the do that's on their identity or their be. Yeah, I'll roll with that.
Yeah, I love it. In a lot of these stories, it's important to have some sort of support when you're going through this failure experience. And I think that's one of the insights that, is being gained through some of these conversations, that no matter where that's coming from, it's important because it's not easy, right? I think there's a relief in some ways once you acknowledge, like, this is not working.
Yeah.
This is failing.
Yep.
Right. And then you start to reflect and retrospect, and then you take action. And when you take a risk, and having support is really important. And speaking of taking risks, we talked about the macro and the micro. In both of those scenarios, you took a risk in there, becoming aware of, hey, this is not working, this is failing, or this could fail. What has this taught you to this point about risk taking?
Yeah.
How has this shaped your approach to risk taking now?
So I don't know if I told you the story, but we live in the Dominican Republic, and we recently, like 2 weeks ago, went to this local cenote, like a natural pool. And there's what do you call it? Like a deck about 7 feet up from the water that you can jump off of and into the water. And my 9-year-old was standing at this, wanting to do it. Like, and you got to almost picture this, like wanting to quit your job or wanting to open that business or whatever. He's standing there, and it's like, I want to do it, but he backs up a little bit, little giggle, little unsure, whatever. When I'm like, come on, buddy, you can do it. It's like, no, don't push me. Like, just, I'm going to do it. But just, you could see it, right? He's a little bit scared, panicked, this, that, and the other. And at a certain point, recognizing in that moment, I hope this was a good dad moment, that like, this isn't damaging him to push him. Like, we all need a little bit of a push. I said to him, I know you're scared, but I'm going to count down from 5. And when I get to 1, you're either jumping or I'm throwing you in. And initially there was the resistance, like, no. And I started counting 5. No, dad, 4. He said, okay. By 3, he jumps in, right? And then what happens next? He swims back up. I hear his feet go up on this, all the way up the steps, and then right back in, like no hesitation on the second jump. Those giggles, that child laughter, all of that stuff. In that moment, he had the fear of that action, that there could be a consequence. What if I get water up my nose? Whatever his fear was, what if I die? Who knows? But he had that fear in that moment. So he didn't want to take the risk. And the only thing that got him to take the risk was a bigger fear, which was dad throwing him in. So something that I think for me helps me with risk is really putting it in perspective. And this is how I do that. One of the worst questions a podcaster asks, and I hope you don't ask this, but no, is what would you tell your 22-year-old self? What advice would you give your 22-year-old self? I'm like, that's the dumbest. I can't do that. And even if I did, I don't know about you, if I met my 22-year-old self and told him what to do, he still wouldn't do it. He was a dick, right? He knew everything, like all of us do at that age. Like, wow, that's not going to be me, right? So it's a silly question. But when you flip it and you go to the future, especially when you're 42, about to quit your job, leave $400,000 on the table, about $600,000-700,000 in equity, that's going to just go away. Restrict the stock units that have invested. Bye-bye. And you've got a wife without a job, and you got 2 kids, and there's healthcare, and there's all these things that you're thinking about. And the risk feels so huge. I looked at 90-year-old me. I really did. This was a moment on that drive to Florida. It's like, all right, if I met the guy that's going to die the last day, and it's me, like only I know him, and I know exactly who he is, what he feels like, what he's thought, what his life experiences have been. I know that guy. If I walked in with him and explained the fear that I have, he'd be like, you're 42, you're healthy, you're in your prime earning years, your prime health years, you've got viability, you can earn money in so many different ways, including getting a job if you need to. Your kids are young and they love you and they want to hang out with you. Your wife, you and her are still in that honeymoon phase 15, 20 years into your marriage, right? I'm going to die. That's the bigger fear that drives me today to make sure that the fear that does bubble up, whatever that fear is, open that business, do that event, go on that show, take that stage, whatever it is. It's like, this is nothing compared to this fear. The last day of my life and saying, why didn't I try that? Like, because what? Judgment? I might have lost a little money. Something might have happened. Why didn't I just take that leap? That scares me way more. That's dad about to throw me off of the patio into the cenote or whatever the hell it's called. That's the bigger fear to leverage to overcome the current fear. Because at the end of the day, I don't know of a bigger one. Leaving this one life we get without taking the action that we truly want to because of temporary pain or temporary judgment or whatever. It sounds crazy when you put it in that context. So I don't know of a fear that I haven't met one yet, a fear that's bigger than that fear. So I leverage the bigger fear to overcome the fear in the moment and jump into the.
Love it. Well, hey, I feel like that's a great spot to wrap this up. We're getting close to my time limit for these conversations, and you dropped some incredible wisdom, and some things that I'm going to have to digest a little bit. I love the concept of the larger fear pushing you towards your, the smaller fear, which is taking a leap. And one of the things I think is important for all of us to think about is that future self, right? To really and work at visualizing and being tangible about that visualization of who is that person, right? And how do they talk to you in your present, and who are they, and how do you work towards that? So many good things there, Jamie. I really appreciate it. You're doing a lot of stuff, not just an amazing human, but you do a lot of things. And if people want to connect with you in any way or want to follow you, you want to give that information?
Yeah, I'm very active on Instagram at the Jamie Gruber, and if interested in looking at being part of the communities that you and I belong to, GoAbundanceEmerge.com, GoAbundanceEmerge.com. I got to say that more clearly, is the website you can apply there.
Sweet. I need to follow you on Instagram. I don't know if I'm following you yet, so that's one thing that I got to do today.
Come on, what are you doing?
Cool. Thanks for everything, man. I'm so glad that we got to spend some time together. You're doing a great work, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, brother.